Duke Marcus had spent 3 years systematically destroying the Ashford family fortune, planning every bankruptcy, every debt, every humiliation. His revenge against the man who killed his sister was nearly complete, until he realized he had fallen in love with his enemy's innocent sister, the very woman he had forced into marriage as the final blow. The marriage was meant to be his final act of revenge, but somewhere between her quiet strength and unexpected compassion for his pain, vengeance became something he had never expected to feel again: love. The autumn rain hammered against the mullioned windows of Ravencroft Manor as Duke Marcus Blackwood stood in his study, reviewing the documents that marked the final stage of his carefully orchestrated revenge. 3 years of meticulous planning had brought him to this moment, the complete financial ruin of the Ashford family, engineered with surgical precision to ensure that every member of the household that had harboured his sister's killer would suffer as he had suffered. The papers spread across his mahogany desk told a story of systematic destruction. Foreclosed mortgages on properties he had secretly purchased through intermediaries, called-in loans he had arranged through his banking connections, ruined business partnerships he had sabotaged from within. Lord Henry Ashford, the man who had murdered Marcus's beloved sister Catherine in a duel over a gambling debt, was dead. Killed in another duel 2 years ago, but his family remained, and Marcus's thirst for vengeance had not died with his enemy. Today marked the culmination of everything he had worked toward. Lady Evelyn Ashford, Henry's innocent sister, would become his bride in a marriage arranged to settle the family's crushing debts. She would spend the rest of her life bearing the name of the man who had destroyed her family, never knowing that every misfortune that had befallen her, had been carefully orchestrated by her new husband. Marcus walked to the tall windows overlooking the drive, where he could see the approaching carriage that carried his bride-to-be. The satisfaction he had expected to feel was strangely absent, replaced by something that felt uncomfortably like unease. He had never seen Lady Evelyn up close, had deliberately avoided her during the brief negotiations with her guardian. She was simply a means to an end, a final twist of the knife in his revenge against the Ashfords. The carriage drew to a halt before the manor's imposing entrance, and Marcus watched as a slight figure in a dark travelling dress emerged from within. Even from his study window, he could see that Lady Evelyn moved with a dignity that her family's circumstances had not broken. She paused for a moment on the gravel drive, looking up at Ravencroft Manor with what appeared to be resignation rather than fear, then walked toward the front door with steady steps. Mrs. Whitmore, his housekeeper, would be receiving her now, showing her to the rooms that had been prepared. The wedding was scheduled for the following morning, a simple ceremony in the manor's chapel with only the minimum required witnesses. Marcus had seen no need for elaborate celebrations. This was a business transaction, nothing more. 20 minutes later, a soft knock at his study door interrupted his brooding. "Enter," he called, not looking up from the papers he was pretending to read. "Your Grace," came a voice that was softer and more melodious than he had expected. "I am Lady Evelyn Ashford. I thought it would be appropriate to introduce myself before tomorrow's ceremony." Marcus looked up and felt something unexpected lance through his chest. The woman standing in his doorway was nothing like he had imagined. She was neither the cowering victim nor the haughty aristocrat he had envisioned, but something far more unsettling. A young woman of perhaps 22 with intelligent green eyes and an air of quiet strength that seemed untouched by her family's disgrace. Her auburn hair was simply dressed, and her travelling gown, while well made, showed signs of careful mending that spoke of reduced circumstances faced with dignity. But it was her eyes that caught him off guard, direct, honest, and holding a composure that suggested she understood exactly what this marriage represented and had made peace with her sacrifice. "Lady Evelyn," he said, rising from his desk with automatic courtesy, "I trust your journey was comfortable." "As comfortable as could be expected, Your Grace." She stepped into the room with the confidence of someone accustomed to moving in society, despite her family's fall from grace. "I wanted to thank you for your generosity in this arrangement. I know that our family's debts were considerable." Marcus found himself studying her face, looking for some sign of resentment or calculation, but found only sincere gratitude. It was deeply unsettling. "The arrangement serves my purposes as well," he said carefully. "You need not feel indebted beyond the terms we have agreed upon." "Nevertheless," Evelyn replied, "I am grateful. My cousin Margaret and her young children have been spared destitution because of your willingness to assume responsibility for our family's obligations. That is no small thing." The mention of her cousin struck Marcus unexpectedly. In all his planning, he had focused on the abstract concept of the Ashford family's punishment, not on the specific individuals who would benefit from this marriage. Margaret Ashford, Henry's widow, had 3 young children. Marcus had been vaguely aware of their existence, but had not considered them as real people who might suffer or be helped by his actions. "I see Mrs. Whitmore has made you comfortable," he said, deflecting from thoughts he was not ready to examine. "She has been most kind." "The rooms are lovely." Evelyn paused, seeming to weigh her next words carefully. "Your Grace, I hope you will not think me presumptuous, but I feel I should be direct about my expectations for this marriage." Marcus felt his defences rise. Here it came, the demands, the attempts to extract promises of affection or consideration that he was not prepared to give. "Please, speak freely." "I understand that this is a practical arrangement," Evelyn said, her voice steady and matter-of-fact. "I will do my best to be a credit to your name and to manage your household efficiently. I will not trouble you with romantic expectations or demands upon your time and attention that go beyond what is necessary for appearances." Her words should have brought him relief, but instead they generated a strange sense of loss. She was offering him exactly what he had thought he wanted, a marriage of convenience that would require nothing from him emotionally while serving his purposes of revenge. Yet hearing her describe their future with such calm resignation made something twist uncomfortably in his chest. "That is very practical of you," he managed. "I have learned that practicality serves better than fantasy in difficult circumstances," Evelyn replied, with a slight smile that held more sadness than bitterness. "But I do have one request, if I may." "What is that?" "My cousin Margaret's eldest son James is 10 years old. He is bright and eager to learn, but the family's circumstances have made proper education difficult. If it would not be too great an imposition, I would be grateful if he might be allowed to visit occasionally and make use of your library. I would be happy to oversee his studies myself." Marcus stared at her, thrown completely off balance. He had expected her to ask for jewels, pin money, social privileges, the things that ambitious women typically demanded. Instead, she was asking for educational opportunities for a child who was not even her own. "You're fond of the boy?" he heard himself ask. "I am fond of all Margaret's children. They have had little enough joy in their lives since their father's death." Evelyn's expression softened with genuine affection. "James in particular has such curiosity about the world. It seems cruel to let that be dimmed by circumstances beyond his control." Something about the way she spoke of the children, with protective warmth and a fierce desire to shield them from the consequences of their father's actions, struck Marcus with unexpected force. It was exactly how he had once felt about his own sister Catherine, the need to protect and nurture someone more vulnerable than himself. The parallel was deeply uncomfortable, suggesting connections he was not prepared to acknowledge. "The library is extensive," he said carefully. "I see no reason why the boy could not make use of it, under proper supervision." Evelyn's face lit up with the first truly bright smile he had seen from her, and Marcus felt his breath catch. The transformation was remarkable. Where before she had been merely pretty in a subdued way, the smile revealed a beauty that was both radiant and completely unconscious of its effect. "Thank you, Your Grace. That is most generous." Marcus found himself wanting to say something that would bring back that smile, which was a disturbing impulse that he firmly suppressed. "Is there anything else you require for tomorrow's ceremony?" "No, Your Grace. Mrs. Whitmore has seen to everything." Evelyn's expression had returned to its previous composure, but something warmer remained in her eyes. "I will not keep you from your business any longer." She curtsied gracefully and turned toward the door, pausing only when Marcus spoke again. "Lady Evelyn," she looked back questioningly. "I hope you will find your new home tolerable." "I am sure I shall, Your Grace. Good evening." After she left, Marcus found himself standing at the window again, staring out at the darkening grounds without really seeing them. The encounter had not gone as he had expected. He had been prepared for tears, pleas, perhaps angry accusations about the circumstances that had forced this marriage. He had not been prepared for quiet dignity, practical acceptance, and a complete absence of self-pity. More disturbing still was the realization that Lady Evelyn seemed genuinely unaware of his role in her family's destruction. She had thanked him with apparent sincerity for his generosity in agreeing to the marriage, as if he were doing her family a favour rather than delivering the final blow in a campaign of systematic revenge. The thought that she would eventually learn the truth, that she would discover she had married the architect of everything that had gone wrong in her life, generated an unexpected stab of something that felt uncomfortably like guilt. Marcus pushed the feeling away firmly. He had spent 3 years planning this revenge, had devoted enormous resources and energy to its execution. He would not allow second thoughts to weaken his resolve now that he was so close to completion. The wedding ceremony the next morning was exactly as Marcus had planned it, brief, businesslike, and attended only by the necessary witnesses. Evelyn appeared in the chapel wearing a simple dress of deep blue silk that had clearly been altered from something grander, her composure as steady as it had been the evening before. She spoke her vows in a clear, calm voice that gave no hint of reluctance or distress, and when Marcus placed the heavy gold wedding band on her finger, her only reaction was a slight widening of her eyes at its weight. After the ceremony, they shared a wedding breakfast with a few guests: the local magistrate who had performed the service, Mrs. Whitmore, and Marcus's steward. Evelyn made polite conversation with everyone, asking thoughtful questions about the estate and the local community that demonstrated genuine interest rather than mere courtesy. It was only when the magistrate mentioned the recent improvement in local employment due to increased hiring at several estates in the area that Marcus noticed Evelyn's suddenly sharp attention. "How wonderful," she said warmly. "So many families have struggled in recent years. It must be such a relief for them to find steady work." "Indeed," the magistrate replied. "The Duke's investments in local businesses have made a significant difference. Many families that were facing real hardship have been able to recover their stability." Marcus saw Evelyn glance at him with what looked like approval and felt an unfamiliar warmth at her expression. He had not undertaken those investments for altruistic reasons. They had simply been good business opportunities that served his broader financial strategies. But seeing Evelyn's response made him view them in a different light. After the guests had departed, Marcus retreated to his study to review correspondence that had arrived during the ceremony. He had been working for perhaps an hour when he heard voices in the hallway outside, Evelyn speaking with Mrs. Whitmore about household arrangements. "I do not wish to disrupt routines that are already working well," Evelyn was saying. "Perhaps you could show me how things are currently managed, and I can learn to work within your established systems." "That's very thoughtful of you, Your Grace," Mrs. Whitmore replied, and Marcus could hear genuine pleasure in the older woman's voice. "I confess I was worried about changes, but you seem to understand how important it is to maintain stability for the staff." "Change for its own sake rarely improves anything," Evelyn replied, "though I hope you will let me know if you see opportunities for improvements. I may notice things with fresh eyes that could be helpful." Marcus found himself listening intently to the conversation, struck by Evelyn's approach. Most new wives of his acquaintance would have insisted on making immediate changes to establish their authority. Evelyn seemed more interested in understanding and preserving what worked, while looking for genuine improvements, rather than mere assertions of power. Over the following days, Marcus found himself observing his new wife with growing fascination. She moved through the manor with quiet efficiency, learning the routines and rhythms of the household without disrupting them. She spent time with each of the servants, learning their names and responsibilities, asking about their families and showing genuine interest in their responses. Most remarkably, she seemed to have no understanding of the concept of servants as a separate class of people. Marcus watched through his study window one morning as she helped the kitchen maid carry heavy baskets of laundry, despite the girl's protests that such work was beneath a duchess. When the head groom's son fell and scraped his knee badly, Evelyn knelt in the stable-yard dirt to clean and bandage the wound, completely unconcerned about her dress. "She's a strange one, Your Grace," Mrs. Whitmore confided to him one afternoon, "but a good strange, if you understand my meaning. Haven't seen her idle for a moment since she arrived, but she's not running about giving orders either, just helping where help is needed." Marcus did understand, and it troubled him. The Lady Evelyn he was observing bore no resemblance to the spoiled aristocrat he had imagined when planning his revenge. She was practical, kind, and completely without pretension, qualities that made it increasingly difficult to see her as merely a tool for punishing her family's crimes. The crisis came exactly 1 week after their wedding, when young James Ashford arrived for his first session in the library. Marcus had been working in his study when he heard excited voices in the hallway, Evelyn greeting her cousin's son with obvious delight, and the boy's enthusiastic chatter about the books he hoped to see. "Evelyn!" the boy exclaimed, and Marcus could hear the joy in his voice. "Cousin Margaret said you married a duke. Does that mean you're a duchess now?" "It does," Evelyn replied with gentle amusement, "but I'm still the same person who used to read you stories. Will you still read to me sometimes, even though you're important now?" "Of course I will," Evelyn said warmly. "Being important doesn't mean forgetting the people we love." Marcus found himself moving toward the study door, drawn by an impulse he didn't fully understand. Through the partially open door he could see Evelyn kneeling to embrace the boy, who was perhaps 10 years old with his father's dark hair but a more open, innocent face. "Now," Evelyn was saying, "shall we see this magnificent library? His Grace has been very generous in allowing you to study here." "Is he nice?" James asked with the directness of childhood. "Mother worries that he might be stern." "He has been very kind to me," Evelyn replied, and Marcus was startled to hear what sounded like genuine warmth in her voice. "I think you will find him fair, which is sometimes more important than nice." As they moved toward the library, Marcus heard James chattering about his siblings, how his sister Lucy was learning to paint and his baby brother Thomas was starting to walk. The boy's obvious love for his family and excitement about simple pleasures struck Marcus with an unexpected pang of something that felt like longing. An hour later, he found himself walking toward the library, ostensibly to retrieve a book but actually drawn by curiosity about how the reading session was progressing. He paused in the doorway, struck by the scene before him. Evelyn sat in one of the large leather chairs with James curled up beside her, both of them absorbed in a volume of natural history. She was explaining the illustrations to him, her voice patient and encouraging as she helped him with the more difficult words. The afternoon sunlight streaming through the tall windows illuminated them both, creating a picture of domestic peace that was almost painfully beautiful. "The Duke has so many books," James was saying wonderingly. "Has he read them all?" "I don't know," Evelyn replied, "but having them means that you could read them all if you wanted to. That's the wonderful thing about libraries. They hold more knowledge than any one person could learn in a lifetime, but it's all there waiting for anyone curious enough to explore." "Will you help me explore?" James asked, looking up at her with complete trust. "For as long as you want to learn," Evelyn promised, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of his head. Marcus found himself backing away from the doorway, unsettled by the intensity of his reaction to the scene. There was something profoundly moving about Evelyn's patience with the boy, the way she made learning seem like an adventure rather than a chore. It reminded him painfully of his own sister Catherine, who had possessed the same gift for finding joy in simple things and sharing that joy with others. The parallel was deeply unwelcome, forcing him to confront similarities he had been trying to avoid. Catherine too had been innocent of the crimes that had led to her death. She had not been responsible for the gambling debts that had sparked the duel, had not even known about the confrontation until it was too late to intervene. Yet she had paid the ultimate price for her association with the wrong people. Was he now doing the same thing to Evelyn that Henry Ashford had done to Catherine, making her suffer for crimes she had not committed, punishing her for the actions of others? The thought was deeply disturbing, challenging the narrative of justified revenge that had driven him for 3 years. Marcus pushed it away firmly, but found it returning with increasing frequency over the following days. His internal conflict deepened as he continued to observe Evelyn's behaviour. She had been at Ravencroft Manor for 2 weeks when the first crisis arose, a fever outbreak in the village that threatened to become serious if not properly managed. Marcus learned about it from his steward, who mentioned in passing that several families were ill and the local physician was overwhelmed. "Perhaps we should increase our distance from the village until the illness passes," the steward suggested. "No point in risking exposure unnecessarily." Before Marcus could respond, Evelyn appeared in the study doorway. "I beg your pardon for interrupting, but I couldn't help overhearing. There's illness in the village?" "Nothing that concerns the manor," Marcus said quickly, noting the immediate concern in her expression. "But people are suffering," Evelyn said simply. "How many families are affected?" 7 or 8, the steward replied reluctantly. "The physician is doing what he can, but 7 or 8 families is nearly the entire village," Evelyn finished. "Those people depend on the estate for their livelihoods. Surely we have some responsibility to help." Marcus stared at her. "You want to go into a village full of sick people?" "I want to help if I can," Evelyn replied calmly. "I have some skill with nursing and herbal remedies. My mother taught me before she died." "Absolutely not," Marcus said immediately. "I will not have you risking exposure to disease." Evelyn tilted her head, studying him with an expression he couldn't read. "That is very considerate, but I am not asking your permission. I am simply informing you of what I intend to do." The quiet steel in her voice surprised him. This was the first time she had shown anything resembling defiance, and it came not from selfishness, but from a desire to help others. "Evelyn," he said, using her first name without thinking, "the risk is too great." "The risk to them is greater if no one helps," she replied. "I will be careful, but I cannot sit in comfort while people who depend on this estate suffer needlessly." She turned to leave, but Marcus caught her arm gently. "If you are determined to do this, you will not go alone. I will accompany you." Evelyn's eyes widened in surprise. "That is not necessary, Your Grace." "It is entirely necessary," Marcus replied firmly. "If you insist on this foolishness, the least I can do is ensure you have protection." For the first time since he had known her, Evelyn smiled at him with unguarded pleasure. "Thank you. That is very kind." The next few days opened Marcus's eyes to aspects of his wife's character that left him both amazed and humbled. Evelyn moved through the sick households with calm competence, tending fever patients, preparing herbal remedies, and organizing the healthy family members to care for each other. She worked tirelessly from dawn to dusk, never showing any sign of fear or disgust despite the difficult conditions. Marcus found himself relegated to the role of assistant, fetching water, carrying supplies, and learning to follow her quietly efficient instructions. He watched her comfort frightened children, sit with elderly patients through long nights, and somehow managed to bring hope to families who had been facing the possibility of losing everything. On the third day, as they walked back to the manor in the evening, Marcus found himself studying her profile in the fading light. She looked exhausted but satisfied, her simple dress stained and rumpled from her work. "Why?" he asked suddenly. "Why what? Why do this? These people are not your family, not your responsibility. You could live quite comfortably, never knowing or caring about their problems." Evelyn was quiet for so long that he thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft and thoughtful. "My brother Henry was not a bad person, not truly. But he lived his entire life believing that other people existed for his convenience, that their problems were not his concern as long as he was comfortable." She paused, seeming to weigh her words. "I watched what that attitude did to him, how it hollowed him out until he was capable of terrible things. I decided very young that I never wanted to become that person." "Even after everything that happened to your family?" Marcus asked, thinking of her reduced circumstances and forced marriage. "Especially after that," Evelyn replied firmly. "Suffering should teach us compassion, not bitterness. If I let hardship turn me cruel or selfish, then I become part of the problem instead of part of the solution." Her words struck Marcus like a physical blow, forcing him to confront the uncomfortable truth about his own choices. For 3 years, he had let grief and anger shape him into exactly the kind of person Evelyn described, someone who saw others as tools for his own purposes, who was willing to cause suffering to innocent people in pursuit of his goals. The realization was deeply unwelcome, challenging everything he had told himself about the righteousness of his revenge. Seeing Evelyn's genuine goodness, her instinctive kindness toward people who could do nothing for her in return, made his own calculated cruelty seem petty and small. That night, alone in his study, Marcus found himself examining his actions over the past 3 years with new and uncomfortable clarity. He had been so focused on the abstract concept of justice that he had lost sight of the real people affected by his schemes. The Ashford family's financial ruin had not just punished the memory of Henry, it had impoverished his widow and children, forced Evelyn into marriage with a stranger, and eliminated the security of dozens of servants and tenants who had depended on their employment. Meanwhile, his own obsession with revenge had consumed years of his life that could have been spent building something positive, had isolated him from meaningful relationships, had turned him into someone his sister Catherine would not have recognised or approved of. The thought of Catherine brought a familiar stab of grief, but for the first time it was accompanied by shame. His sister had been one of the kindest people he had ever known, someone who found joy in helping others and believed deeply in the possibility of redemption. She would have been horrified by what he had done in her name. Marcus poured himself a glass of brandy and stared into the fire, trying to imagine how he could possibly atone for what he had done. The damage was already complete. The Ashfords were ruined, Evelyn was trapped in a loveless marriage with her family's destroyer, and he had built his revenge so carefully that there was no simple way to undo it. But perhaps, he thought, there might be a way to build something better from the ruins he had created. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Marcus's steward appeared in the study with a letter that had arrived by urgent messenger during the night. "From your solicitor in London, Your Grace," the man said, his expression troubled. "He says it requires your immediate attention." Marcus broke the seal and scanned the contents, feeling his blood run cold as he absorbed the implications. Henry Ashford had not died in a duel as everyone believed. According to new evidence that had come to light, he had been murdered, shot by someone who had made it look like a death in combat. The real killer had been identified and arrested, confessing to the crime as part of a larger investigation into a gambling conspiracy. More damning still, the evidence suggested that Henry had been trying to leave the gambling circuit that had destroyed his finances, that he had been making an effort to reform his life and pay back his debts honestly. His death had not been the result of his own reckless behaviour, but a calculated murder designed to silence him before he could expose the criminal network. Marcus set the letter down with trembling hands, his world reshaping itself around this new information. Everything he had believed about Henry Ashford's death was wrong. The man he had spent 3 years punishing had been as much a victim as Catherine, killed for trying to do the right thing rather than dying as a consequence of his own choices, which meant that everything Marcus had done, the systematic destruction of the Ashford family, the forced marriage, the years of careful revenge, had been based on a lie. He had become exactly what he had claimed to be fighting against, someone who destroyed innocent lives for his own purposes. The sound of footsteps in the hallway warned him that Evelyn was approaching. Marcus quickly folded the letter and slipped it into his desk drawer, not yet ready to face the conversation that this revelation would require. But he knew he could not avoid it forever. The truth would have to come out, and when it did, he would have to find a way to explain to the woman he was beginning to love that he had married her as an act of revenge against crimes her brother had never committed. "Good morning," Evelyn said, appearing in the doorway with her usual calm smile. "I hope you slept well. I wanted to thank you again for your help in the village. The physician says the fever has broken in most of the patients." Marcus looked at her, really looked at her, taking in the way the morning light caught the auburn highlights in her hair, the genuine warmth in her green eyes, the unconscious grace with which she moved. She had trusted him completely, had thanked him for his generosity, had begun to care for him despite believing their marriage to be nothing more than a business arrangement. And he had built it all on a foundation of lies and misguided revenge. "Evelyn," he said, his voice rougher than he intended, "we need to talk." Something in his tone made her smile fade, replaced by a look of concern. "What's wrong?" Marcus stood and moved to the window, unable to meet her eyes as he prepared to destroy whatever fragile trust had begun to grow between them. "There are things about our marriage, about your family's circumstances that you don't understand. Things I should have told you from the beginning." "I see," Evelyn said quietly, and he could hear her moving closer. "What kind of things?" "The kind that will make you hate me," Marcus replied, still staring out at the grounds rather than facing her. "The kind that will show you exactly what sort of man you married." There was a long silence before Evelyn spoke again, her voice steady but careful. "Perhaps you should tell me, and let me decide how I feel about it." Marcus turned to face her then, seeing the way she had braced herself for whatever revelation was coming. She stood straight and composed, but he could see the tension in her posture, the wariness that had not been there moments before. "Your family's financial ruin was not an accident," he said simply. "It was deliberately orchestrated, carefully planned and executed over 3 years. Every debt that was called in, every business partnership that failed, every property that was foreclosed, all of it was arranged by someone with the resources and connections to manipulate your family's circumstances." Evelyn's face went very still. "I see. And you know this how?" "Because I was the one who arranged it," Marcus said, the words falling into the space between them like stones into still water. "I destroyed your family systematically and deliberately, and I married you as the final act of revenge against your brother Henry." The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Marcus watched as understanding dawned in Evelyn's eyes, followed by hurt, betrayal, and something that looked like grief. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Why?" "Because I believed Henry killed my sister Catherine in a duel 3 years ago," Marcus replied. "Because I wanted him and everyone connected to him to suffer as I had suffered. Because I was so consumed with grief and anger that I convinced myself that destroying innocent people was justified if it served my need for revenge." Evelyn sank into one of the chairs near his desk, her face pale but her composure intact. And now I've learned that Henry didn't kill Catherine in a duel. He was murdered by someone else entirely, someone who made it look like death in combat. Your brother was trying to reform his life when he was killed. He was as much a victim as my sister was. Marcus watched as Evelyn processed this information, her expression cycling through shock, pain, and something that might have been relief. When she looked up at him again, her eyes held a complex mixture of emotions he couldn't fully read. "So everything you believed was wrong," she said finally. "Everything," Marcus confirmed, "which means everything I did was wrong. The revenge I spent 3 years planning and executing was based on a complete misunderstanding of the facts. And our marriage?" Marcus felt something twist painfully in his chest. "Was meant to be your punishment for being Henry's sister. I thought forcing you to bear the name of your family's destroyer while living in the house where that destruction was planned would be a fitting form of justice." Evelyn was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands folded in her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice was surprisingly calm. "I should hate you for that," she said. "For the coldness of it, for the calculation required to destroy a family so systematically. For marrying me under false pretenses and planning to make me suffer for crimes I didn't commit." "You should," Marcus agreed. "The fact that you don't shows a generosity of spirit that I certainly don't deserve." "Oh, I didn't say I don't hate you," Evelyn replied, looking up at him with eyes that held pain but also something harder. "Part of me does hate you, Marcus. Part of me wants to rage at you for what you've done to people I love, for the years of hardship and fear you caused, for the way you manipulated me into gratitude for your so-called generosity." Marcus nodded, accepting her anger as his due. "But," Evelyn continued, "another part of me understands why you did it. Grief makes people capable of terrible things. I've seen it before, the way loss can twist love into something destructive. What you did was wrong, inexcusably wrong, but it came from a place of genuine pain." "That doesn't excuse it," Marcus said. "No, it doesn't," Evelyn agreed, "but it explains it, which makes it possible to move forward from here." Marcus stared at her, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. "Move forward?" "The damage is done, Marcus. Our families are connected now through marriage, and undoing that connection would only create more hurt for more people. The question is not whether we can go back to how things were before. We can't. The question is whether we can build something better from where we are now." The generous practicality of her response left Marcus speechless. She had every right to demand annulment of their marriage, to expose his actions publicly, to make him suffer as he had made her family suffer. Instead, she was suggesting that they try to build a genuine partnership from the ruins of his revenge. "I don't deserve that kind of forgiveness," he managed. "Probably not," Evelyn agreed with brutal honesty. "But Margaret and her children deserve a chance at security and happiness. The servants and tenants who depend on this estate deserve stability, and I deserve a chance to make something meaningful out of the circumstances I can't change." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens where Marcus had watched her help with the laundry just days earlier. "Besides," she added softly, "I've seen glimpses of who you really are beneath all that anger and guilt. The man who insisted on helping in the village, who noticed that I was working too hard and made sure I had assistance. The man who approved James's use of the library without a second thought, because a child's education mattered more than social conventions." Marcus felt his throat tighten at her words. "Those things don't balance out what I did to your family." "No, they don't," Evelyn said, turning back to face him. "But they suggest that the man who planned that revenge isn't the whole truth of who you are. People are capable of change, Marcus. They're capable of choosing to be better than their worst actions." She paused, seeming to weigh her words carefully. "I propose a bargain," she said finally. "You help me repair as much of the damage as possible, restore Margaret's security, provide for the children's futures, use your resources to build instead of destroy. In return, I'll help you become the man I think you could be, the man your sister would have wanted you to be." Marcus studied her face, looking for signs of calculation or hidden anger, but finding only sincere determination. She was offering him redemption he had not earned, forgiveness he certainly didn't deserve, and a chance to atone for 3 years of systematic cruelty. "Why?" he asked finally. Evelyn smiled, and for the first time since their conversation had begun, it reached her eyes. "Because somewhere in the past 3 weeks, despite everything I now know about how this marriage came to be, I've begun to care for you," she said simply. "Because I've seen your capacity for kindness when you forget to be angry.